Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to another installation of Craft Chat. My name is Titi Ngwenya. I'm Director of Communications at Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. And we're really excited to welcome artist Laura Petrovich-Cheney today. She's going to give us a little video studio tour and demo of woodcutting. And then she's going to talk to us about her wood quilt sculpture process and much more. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that we are going to begin with a short video after we talk for a little bit. And during that time, if you have questions, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. There's a chat button at the bottom of your screen and a chat box on the side of your screen. We will, after we have our short discussion, we will answer as many of those questions during our Q&A section, as many of those questions as possible. If you don't know, Fuller Craft Museum has reopened to the public. We're very excited about that, and you can come and visit us and see all of our beautiful works of art on Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. For more information about that, you can go to our website at fullercraft.org. Before we get started, I'd just like to say, if you're enjoying our craft chats, if you enjoy this programming, if you would like to support the museum, the exhibitions, and the other programming, the workshops, and all the things that Fuller Craft does, please feel free to make a donation in any size to the museum. There is a link at the top of the chat box, and you can click on that link to make a donation. If you would like to make one later, you can go to our website at fullercraft.org/give. And now I'd like to just introduce our Director of Education, Sage Brousseau. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here today with all of you and with our very special guest, Laura Petrovich-Cheney. She is a really great friend to the museum. We got to know Laura about 5-6 years ago now, when we had her really moving exhibition, What Remains, in the museum, which was several of her wooden scrap quilts, which we're going to learn a little bit more about today, how she started doing this, what her influences have been, and then we'll talk a little bit more after we share some video with you and talk about her current, or our piece that's currently in our exhibition, Shelter Place, Social Distance. So Laura, welcome.
Hello.
How are you today, Laura?
Good, thank you. How are you?
We're doing good. So Laura, I think that your video is going to kind of do a little bit of an introduction, but do you have a few words that you want to share about this video?
No, just I hope that you enjoy it and want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation with everyone.
All right, great.
It's exciting.
All right, let's hit play.
Good afternoon. My name is Laura Petrovich-Cheney. Thank you so much for joining me today here at the Fuller Craft Museum. This is a piece that's featured in this exhibit, and it is called Cornered. And if you're thinking, wow, it looks like a quilt, you are right. It is a quilt. And it is a quilt made from wood collected after natural disasters such as the 2012 Hurricane Sandy or the 2016 Gatlinburg fires. Quilts, for me, represent comfort, home, and security. And we're going to talk a little bit about my practice today. When Hurricane Sandy had hit, I was living in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and I was able to collect a lot of wood. And I put all the wood back from my community that I could. In a way, it was giving me comfort in trying to make order out of all the disorder. It also affected me so personally because my parents' home was destroyed, my childhood shore house. This is an image of my father. And during the process of repairing his home, he died of a heart attack, and several months later, my mother. So for me, losing home became a bigger disaster. In 2016, I was invited down to Gatlinburg, Tennessee to collect wood from their fires. Before we take a look at the in-depth process, let me share with you my studio. I'm so lucky to have this beautiful studio above my garage. It's a two-car garage, so the space is pretty large. What you're seeing here is an old-fashioned design table where I make my work. And milk crates are a vital part of my practice because they hold all my wood. Here are some more milk crates under my table. And as you can see, I really don't throw any pieces away. I save little triangles, little squares, and I keep them in these milk crates under the table, on the side of the table, in my garage. Can you tell that I was an elementary school teacher with access to these crates? Anyhow, this is my sander. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. The filtration system for that sander. Over here we have my chop saw, which I will also be demonstrating and explaining why I have this crazy pink board there. And over on the right-hand corner you can see my baby bandsaw. This is another view of that table, and we're going to take a look at the piece over there in the corner. That's my table saw, and this table saw I use primarily to cut my boards. The boards are the backing for my pieces. After I cut the board, I prime them, and you can see that primed piece is on the left-hand side, and I actually will draw a grid mark according to the design. Here are some images of some works in progress where my grid marks are pretty clear, and they just designate mostly lights or dark colors. So what I'm going to show you right here in my studio is how I work. Just like a quilter has yardage of fabric, I have wood material, and this right here is a 1x4. But this 1x4 is a little too big to put on my bandsaw. So I'm going to show you how I make this smaller by bringing it over to my miter saw. Let's take a walk over. So this is my miter saw, and this pink contraption here keeps the dust at a minimum for me. So I've already measured this before, and I'm going to just cut this down into a smaller, more workable piece. Okay, so now I have a much more workable piece, and what I do now is I use material like a quilter's ruler and this other ruler. If you're a quilter, you know these things are so important in what you do, and they are for me as well, because these are wood quilts. So I'm going to measure my lines here. And now we're going to go over to the bandsaw. Okay, so here we are, and this is my favorite machine. This is the one I use mostly. So we're going to cut these pieces down. Tossing the pieces that I don't need into my scrap pile so I can use them for later. Now these edges are kind of rough, so now I'm going to sand them on my sander. So I have the blue pieces cut, and I'm going to line them up to the piece that was already cut from before, and check my work. And they should fit if my measurements are correct. And I'm noticing here that I do have to take a little bit off the blue, maybe just a resanding instead of a recutting, but that's it. So the old adage, measure twice, cut once, works every time. Hey everybody, so we're here in Salem, Massachusetts in my storage unit to answer two of the most popular questions that I get. The first question that I get is, am I ever afraid of running out of wood? And the answer to that question is no, I'm not afraid of running out of wood. I lived through Hurricane Sandy and experienced some of the worst of the natural disasters ever. And I was able to collect so much of it because I lived through it. And the second question that I get is, do I paint the wood? And the answer to that is absolutely not. I was fortunate enough to find so many wonderful colors in this world. In fact, let me show you some of them. Right here, I have this incredible orange. This was from a kitchen cabinet in Ocean, New Jersey. And it was really great that I could collect all the kitchen cabinets that were this color. I have over here this huge kitchen cabinet with the door handles still on. It's a beautiful light blue, sky blue color. Here, picked up from Bay Head, New Jersey, was this incredibly lovingly hand-painted purple or lilac dresser top, complete with the little trim on it. I mean, what a gorgeous color. I also have this dark green trim, and I have this other kind of floor trim that's green. It has this cool little edge to it. I have over here a purple and red and blue door. I have an orange side of a boat. I have green floorboards. I have yellow siding. I have white. I have gray. And I have some really cool dark blue. Don't tell anybody, this will be our secret. But behind me, I have a police barricade that's a gorgeous dark blue. So as you can see, it's pretty obvious. I'll probably never run out of wood. As long as there's natural disasters, I'll always have the opportunity. So back in my Marblehead studio, I have a little desk where I work on my sketchbook. The sketchbook is also a journal and filled with graph paper. And I'm going to show you what's inspired Cornered. It was a calf faucet quilt with the block being in the the bottom left-hand corner, and the 45-degree angle pieces surrounded it, all pointed up to the left. And I drew this out so that the piece cornered is 36 by 36. And I just was not happy with the block being up at the left-hand side. It just wasn't feeling right. And you could see that here, that was where it was supposed to be. And I played around with it and made them. I even made smaller pieces to fit, and it just didn't feel right. So I deviated from the plan and decided to put the block in the middle. It felt more stable and felt more secure, and the end result is this piece. Thank you for tuning in, and I really hope you have an opportunity to see Cornered, as well as many, many other great works in shelter, place, social distance, a newest exhibit at the Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. Thank you.
I was going to chime in and ask Laura a little bit about the process that she was showing us, because I know, Laura, that your process is a really important part of your work, and that was something that you really wanted to share with all of us. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure, absolutely. I started off as a quilter. I've been quilting since I was about 17, and the process is very similar in that I take large pieces of wood and make them into smaller geometric shapes. And then from there, I put them back together. A quilter takes fabric, cuts it into smaller pieces, and sews it back together. And then a quilt actually has 3 layers. It has the top, the patchwork part, and then it has the middle batting, and then it has the backing. in my wood quilts, I have the top part, and I have the glue layer and that backing that you saw that I cut on the bandsaw. So they're really pretty similar. And interestingly enough, the bandsaw behaves the same way as a sewing machine. It's two wheels that keep going around, but instead of a needle going up and down, it's a blade that goes circular in which I can cut the wood. So it's really just a seamless process for me to do both, the switching from the fabric to the wood. And I just love making the wood quilts.
Yeah, that's kind of what I love about craft, is that they're sort of like universal threads, if you will, that kind of cross all media sometimes. And I think that it's kind of a leap to go from fabric to wood, but you do it so well. And I love also, I mean, you were starting to talk about the colors of the surface and stuff. And I wasn't sure if you were still working from the same scraps that you scavenged from Sandy, or if there were others that you continue to collect.
Right. No, it's primarily from Sandy. As you can see, that storage unit's about the size of a one-bedroom storage unit. So most of that is Sandy, but I have collected other wood things in Massachusetts. I've had the opportunity to get some wood from some of the storms here. One of my neighbors' Adirondack chairs kind of blew over, and they gave me that. But the majority of it is from Sandy, and I don't paint it. I mean, the colors are as they are. And to me, that's really important, not changing it and adding that piece of what somebody else had done. You know, somebody else had painted it, the house painter had made it, or the furniture made it. And I love that inclusion of other people in my work as well.
Yeah. What I really like about your work is that you're transforming tragedy into something beautiful. Especially from the storms. And could you talk a little about that, as how that is for you and what it means in your work?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, especially right now, we're going through so much, and it can be so challenging. And what do you do with all these emotions, the ups and the downs? You know, we were talking about the good times that we're kind of having with family, reconnecting, you know, doing puzzles with family members. But at the same time, you realize, like, ooh, this is strange. We're all locked in here. Hurricane Sandy was the same way. We had great times during the nearly month without electricity. We had dinners with our neighbors. We'd all have potluck. And, you know, you want to hold on to some of those memories that you make during the tragedy. And for me, these quilts are about that hope, about that coming back together, you know, collecting the wood and talking to the people about what their house meant and what they had lived through, and the shared experience, and that need to communicate something that's awful, that's happening, that sometimes you need to have connection with to process.
Have you spoken to people who have survived Sandy and seen your work and what their response is?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear their stories. And I think the biggest comment that they give is, how do you remember where all the wood came from? And I do. When I say, oh, I remember this piece came from Bayhead, or this piece came from Manasquan, or this one from Long Branch, they say, oh yeah, I remember. How could you ever forget? You always keep these images of that destruction in your brain. It can't be erased because it was so dramatic. And there's something odd about this, when something is so shocking. You know, like, I'm sure the people in Beirut will never forget what their city looks like now. They'll always be embedded with that visual. You know, and I don't know what that is, you know, how that tragedy kind of just burns in your brain.
A little bit more about the process. Do you always work with sort of those traditional quilt patterns, or do you improvise? Like, what kind of dictates to you what the wooden quilt will be? Is it the individual pieces of wood, or you kind of where do you start with that? Do you start with the quilt pattern, or
A little bit of both. I was going to talk specifically about Cornered, the piece that's in the exhibit at the Fuller Craft Museum now. And that one did not start off with a center block. the center block was supposed to be up in the upper right-hand corner. And I wanted to make, I got really good at 45-degree angles. So sometimes the work is driven by the process of the wood cutting. Sometimes I'm interested in creating tiny pieces, scrap pieces. I'll say to myself, oh, I have way too many little pieces. I have to make one with little. So let me find a quilt pattern. Sometimes it's driven by, hey, I really want to try 45-degree angles. And that's what Cornered was about, the drive to make 45-degree angles. So it started off that way, and I was going to have in the square, the 45-degree angle with the little block in that corner. But when I did that, visually, everything just kept floating up and off, and I didn't like how that looked. So I started to readjust it, and now the blocks are in the center. And yeah, I don't know what drives the work initially, whether it is I need to use up scraps, or I want to try this, or a curve. That each process is its own case. You know, if I want to really use pink, I might just start with that. I do mostly use traditional quilts, and some are modern quilts too, but I love the old traditional patterns and seeing what I can do with that. Yeah, there's that center block, and if you're not sure what the center block is, there are those squares that are that are grouped in fours, and then from there it was that 45-degree angle. And this piece is 3 feet by 3 feet, so each one of those squares is 12 inches. And I really just kind of want it to work larger in that scale, and to make a larger 45-degree angle cut. And that's what drove this piece.
Kind of touched on this a little bit, but what do you feel about this piece being included in the shelter place social distance exhibition that we have currently open? That's sort of our response to the current pandemic that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the pieces are from destroyed homes, you know, and how many people now with the economy are facing eviction? How many people are stuck in their home? You know, the home has now become the workplace, the school. So for me, it is a perfect response to what's happening, because the home is the center of everything. And the title Cornered was made when I was feeling pretty trapped in my community during Hurricane Sandy. We really did not go anywhere. We really couldn't. There was nowhere to go. Without electricity for about 4 to 5 weeks, you weren't leaving. And that feeling of being cornered and isolated works well with this title now, I think. Because I wonder how many people feel cornered in their homes, you know, feel isolated and stuck.
Yeah, we've definitely been feeling that over this pandemic. So there's a question right now about process and the kind of glue that you use. So could you answer that? And if there's any other questions from the viewers, feel free to put them into our chat while we're discussing.
Yeah, I often get the question about the glue. A little backstory to the glue. I use a 2-part resin, and I originally started off with wood glue, but the wood glue was not working well with destroyed wood, because the wood from the hurricane had absorbed so much moisture that I could not use wood glue on it. No matter how much I sanded, no matter how much pressure I put on it, no matter how I clamped it, it was so frustrating because they were not sticking to the board. They would eventually fall off. So I went to a boat store and said, how do you repair a wood boat? And they said, oh yeah, use this 2-part resin. So ever since then, I've been using the 2-part resin. So
I'll do the job.
it does. It does. It's expensive, but it holds it together, and it allows the wood to expand and contract, which is always a big problem with wood pieces. You know, they can grow in the humidity and shrink in the dry heat. So that wood glue is really stable.
We have a great question. That there's a very compelling narrative and in your work, and just about the beauty of you know, creating beauty from destruction, And so it says, will that story be lost over time as the works are distributed into public and private collections? That's a really interesting question. I'm gonna like give a little bit of an answer, and then Laura, I'd obviously want to have your input. I mean, I think it depends on the context, and I think kind of like what we're talking about with Cornered being included in this new exhibition, it gives it new context. It gives it relevance that is, you know, it's always gonna be relevant almost.
Well, I think that's kind of the beauty of artwork. I mean, just because I had intended it to be a certain way when I made it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to keep that intention. And I think that's what we all do with artworks. We kind of bring our own story to it when we look at it. And that's part of a dialogue of art, that once I make it and it goes out in the world, it's its own entity. I only can bring so much to it. And I think that's a hallmark of what artists want to do, is to create something and put it out in the world and let other people bring to it what they want. And I hope people see what they want in it that means something to them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the color palette as well. We've got a question about, you talked a little bit about this just briefly about focusing on shape and design, but do you also kind of draw inspiration from the colors you have available, or how do you work with color?
Color is the best. I'd say color is one of the strongest motivating factors in the work. And again, it is a challenge because they are all found pieces. I never paint the wood. So I guess it's very intuitive. I wish I could discuss it more, because then I would love to teach color theory, but it all comes from what I'm feeling at that moment. And the fun part is, just the other day, I found some really a dark blue headboard that was put out in the garbage. And I was thinking how much I needed a dark blue, a much darker blue than what I normally work with, because I've been using it all up. And then lo and behold, here's this thing on the side of the garbage that I picked up. And I was like, oh, wow, look, a gift from the universe. And that's what's kind of cool about using found materials, is they are gifts. But the color is intuitive, and I love playing around with the color. And I don't know, it's a driving force in the design.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that is one of the most striking things about the work, is that it is so colorful, and that the colors, like they seem almost unexpected when you think about them being, you know, coming from these, you know, this tragic event and destruction and all this thing. You kind of don't imagine that there's so much color in chaos and destruction.
Right. And so surprisingly, how much color we live with in our world. Like, that's what everyone says. Like, how did you find so much color? Well, truthfully, I only need 2 or 3 kitchen cabinets that are orange to last me several years, because the pieces are so small. But a little bit of orange here, a little bit of yellow there. And I love it. I love the fact that, you know, most people will paint a piece of furniture light purple or pink, or I think that's just great. And I love finding those colors. And it's fun to think of all the colors that we live with and how color is so universal to everybody.
Yeah, color is important.
Yeah.
Had you already considered these wooden quilts before Sandy, or did the storm inspire the quilts?
Sage, that's a great question, because I get that a lot. I started them before Sandy, after a really bad nor'easter, but I only found 2 boats, and the boats were really demolished. And one was turquoise and the other was orange. And I brought them into my studio. And the idea of a wood quilt came when I was standing at a grocery store, and I picked up a magazine that said something like decorating with quilts. And I opened it up, and there was this quilt that was turquoise, white, and orange. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's what I can do with these boats. And so I started to make turquoise and orange everything, you know, big pieces, little pieces. And then I eventually picked up some fencing or something on the side of the road. But I was running out of wood. And this was about the summer of 2012. And I thought, well, this has been a great run. This has been a lot of fun. I'm running out of boats. I guess I'll have to find a new body of work. And that October, Hurricane Sandy came. And I remember having no electricity and desperately needing a cup of coffee and driving around my neighborhood trying to get coffee. And I'm running into a dark red dresser. I ran into a green screen door. And here I am cursing the universe because I can't get the coffee. And all this colored furniture and siding and everything is in my way. And I'm driving going, oh my God, wait a minute. I could use yellow. I could use more red. Who needs coffee? I got to go back and get all this stuff. And it was like manna from heaven. So it really took off with Sandy because the material was available and it fit my story of living through Hurricane Sandy, of watching my parents repair their home, of watching my entire neighborhood and communities just destroyed. So
Yeah, wow, that's wild.
yeah.
In the video clip, you were working on a quilt that was little houses, or a wooden quilt that was little houses. Is that piece completed, and what's it called? Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, that house that started in March and I'm still working on it. That is my COVID piece. That is my reaction to COVID. Shelter in place, stay at home. So I started making these little homes. I've been interrupted with it because I've been selling the little pieces. So I've had to make a lot of small ones that are like 9 inches by 12 inches or something. But that's the piece that I'm working on now. That's the big one that kind of defines this time for me here. Now, I've worked on other pieces as well, but that's the ongoing one. It feels like I'll never finish it till COVID is over. Hopefully it'll be over soon, but it's been difficult to make as well because it's very emotional, you know, making little houses when I think about people stuck in them and then what that means. And it's a very charged theme.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you showed us in the video clip a little bit that you have a storage unit with all of your scrap pieces of wood. And then you mentioned just now that you had found this blue headboard that was a gift, you know, from the universe for you. But do you, are you still collecting? Are you selective? Are you, you know, do you feel like you're becoming a bit of a hoarder?
I have to ask my husband that question. Do I hoard wood? I think I do because the studio is above my garage and one bay of the garage is still wood. So I have the garage and the storage unit. And if now I'm just a lot more selective because if I do find a color that I need on the side of the road, I pick it up. But I would say still 90% of the wood is from Hurricane Sandy. I mean, it was just unbelievable the amount of wood that I can collect. And it's easier to store now because I cut it into small pieces and put them in the milk crate. So I can stack and stack and stack. And the milk crates can go about 12 inches.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's incredible the amount of wood that I have.
Yeah, I imagine it's a bit like a smorgasbord of color and shape and stuff. I would probably have a heyday in there.
Yeah, it's a little disgusting sometimes because it is covered in, you know, sand, some of it, and some of it's still really torqued, and it takes a long time to sand it, to cut it. I sometimes have to hand cut it because if it's too warped, I can't run it on a machine. So I'll have to hand cut it. And it's dirty work, but I like it.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that you do come from a background of textiles. So have you ever combined, you know, fabrics and wood, or would you ever consider working with both media together?
I work on them separately. I have tried to combine them, but it hasn't been pleasing. Like you had mentioned earlier, the craft tradition is about taking one thing and kind of turning it into something else. And it's not always real easy or seamless to do that and to do that well. So a lot of times they look like just wood wrapped in fabric or fabric overlay, but it's something I'm always testing and trying out. How can I make wood look more like fabric? How can I make fabric look more like wood? But it's always an ongoing process for sure.
Yeah.
But it is a tradition that is really fun to explore.
What about size? What dictates size? Do you work with sort of the traditional size of like a, constraints of like a bed quilt, or are you working more, the ones that I'm familiar with are about the same size. So I wasn't sure if you had a variety of sizes you work, or if what dictates that.
That's another really good question. The first answer is the back of my flatbed of my pickup truck dictates the size. Because if I can't move it in the car, I can't really work with it. So the largest piece that I've ever worked with is 5 feet. And also too, it's one that I can carry. Now, I have made larger pieces, but they've been sequential, meaning that I had 12 inches by 12 inches and I made 80 of those and put them all together for an enormous work. So I could work in modular systems. For the most part, I like working in squares, 36 inches, 48 inches, 24. It's just a good size for hanging on a wall. But like I said, I have done large installations of multiples. So there's really no, I guess it's divisible by 12. And because I'm working in geometry, quilts are geometry, that there is something about, even numbers and numbers that are divisible into each other. And that the mathematics dictates a lot of the design.
Math. I've only seen your work in the setting of the gallery. Have you ever had any outdoor installations of these works?
It's something I'm working on now. There are plywoods that can work out, like marine plywoods, and my resin certainly can handle the weather, but it's not something I've tackled yet. It is something I am working on in my studio now. One of the problems with the outdoor work is that it becomes more three-dimensional. Right now, they're two-dimensional, so the backing is what gets placed against the wall. If I start going three-dimensional, how does that change the work? And now it becomes a much different conversation, and they look less quilt-like. Because even though quilts are three-dimensional, they still have a front and the back, whether you hang them on the wall or whether you wear them on, or whether you, put them on a bed. They are essentially two-dimensional objects. So when I begin to think about them outdoors, they either hang on the side of a wall or do they become freestanding? And if they're freestanding, are they still a quilt or what are they are now? And that's again, opens up another conversation.
Yeah, that's pretty, yeah. I can imagine them almost like cubes, like four, making a cube, but then it turns into a completely different object.
Correct.
Well, yeah, interesting. One of our viewers is mentioning an artist named Fraser Smith. I don't know if you're familiar with this artist. Also works in wood and has something to echo fabric. Do you know of anyone else who is doing similar work, or are you, one of a kind? I think you're.
I would love to think I was one of a kind, but I know according to my hashtags on Instagram, there are other wood quilters out there. But as far as I know, I'm the only one using salvaged wood from natural disasters, although I'm sure they're salvaging them too. But yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So yeah, I don't know of anybody offhand or personally, but I'm sure they're out there. But I do follow the hashtag, wood quilts, and there's other women doing them.
Oh, interesting.
And other men too, I think, just in a different vein.
That's another good question. Like, I think this is something that you've in previous conversations touched on about, sort of working in wood is sort of a more male dominated area, but you're using, obviously you're a woman and you're using these power tools and you're creating something. They're still hard, but we're referencing quilts which are soft. Can you talk about that a little bit? Have you ever had, what kind of responses have you had from the woodworking world?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I remember specifically at the solo exhibit at the Fuller Craft Museum, I remember talking to somebody there, and they were a couple. She was a quilter, he was a woodworker, and they had such an enjoyable shared experience because she was explaining to him how the quilts were made, and he was explaining to his wife how the wood was made. And I love that. And to me, that's pretty exciting. But more importantly, I love the woodworking tools. I love that dialogue, that I can enter a traditional man's world and kind of blow that open. And for me, that's really fun. And it's fun to try to make this look soft, because on a photograph, sometimes people can't tell that they're made out of wood until you take a really good look at the wood grain instead of the stitching, or you know what I mean?
Do you do anything else in wood, or is it strictly these projects?
I've done other sculptures in wood, a lot of abstract sculptures in wood. I own a chainsaw that I really liked carving out large tree trunks with. But I have to say, primarily, I use the bandsaw, and I've cut a lot of wood tree limbs on that to make an installation of hanging trees once before. So for me, it's, you know, I like using the tools in the wood shop and the sanding. I've never turned wood. That's something else that a lot of people do. They will turn wood to do bowls. I've never tried my hand at that. I'm strictly like cutting and assembling.
It'd be interesting to see some sort of collaboration between, you know, maybe a wood turner and yourself. Because I know that there's like sort of a trend in wood turning with like laminating pieces, and
Yeah.
you might be able to do some really interesting things with the colors, the various colors that you collect.
Yeah, I've actually, someone mentioned, a wood turner had mentioned that he had been laminating various pieces of wood together and then making bowls out of them. I would love to do that with somebody that knows how to do that already. Because for me, even though I have a lot of Hurricane Sandy wood, it's still kind of precious, and I don't know if I really want to take all that wood and try to experiment with something I've never done before. But it certainly would be interesting to see how all the colors would play in and glued and laminated together. To me, that would be interesting to see how painted would look as opposed to different species of wood.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So, but the wood turning world is so different than, I think, the assembly world, you know? Wood
Definitely.
turners are their own group of people.
Yeah. Um, I really, and I think that what really does stand out to me is the emotion that pieces do um, really communicate. Um, and I just wondered if there was any more that you wanted to talk about, you know, the kinds of messages that you're, you know, either intentionally or unintentionally creating or
Well,
communicating through your work.
yeah, for me, I guess, you know, the old adage, a woman's place is in the home. So for me, dealing with pieces of a home and woodworking, I like investigating that history, you know, kind of entering a new conversation of what is home and what shelter means and what happens when home is destroyed, and how then do you rebuild that sense of safety and security that comes with home. Um, and that can be very charged. And I just want my work to be hopeful, because, you know, we all experience tragedy and difficulties, but how do we overcome it? And I think in sharing my experience with others becomes part of the conversation that gives other people lessons to find their own way to overcome tragedy.
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. You said the perfect thing for us to sort of wrap up our conversation, Laura. I completely agree with you, and I feel like that's what we really need a lot right now is this message of hope that there, you know, through tragedy there are, you know, new beginnings, and beauty can be replaced, or can replace all of the sort of damage and destruction that we experience in these kinds of tragic times and events. And your work is a strong symbol for that. So thank you so much for sharing a message
Thank
of hope
you.
with us today. I think we all really can appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm so eager to see all the other work in the exhibit as well at the Fuller Craft Museum. It's
Yeah.
just going to be an amazing show, and I'm so fortunate to be part of it, and really looking forward to seeing what other stories and messages artists are sharing about this time.
Yeah, it's really, it's a powerful show, and it's a great inclusion to have you part of it. And again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you.
I'm so glad to have you as a member of Massachusetts now as well.
That's right.
Transplant. So thanks. And Titi, do you have anything that we need to?
Yes, thank you so much, Laura. I just want to let folks know that this recording will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel, as well as the recording of the video tour that Laura presented. So you can catch that later. We'll send out links to that. And if you'd like to visit our website, you can come see us at fullercraft.org. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, we're open again. For those of you who joined in the middle of our chat, Fuller Craft Museum is open, where you can come see us Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Thanks, folks, for joining us today.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you at the exhibition, everyone.